Well, hi everyone. Thank you for joining me today. The December Essential Vegan Desserts Live event is live in my home kitchen. And we're having a pretty exciting day here in Philadelphia, or it's exciting depending on what you think about snow, because as I look at my terrace door windows, it looks like there's a blizzard coming down. So I wasn't expecting that. But I still have some tomatoes on my plant. We'll see how that works. I'm really excited to be talking about holiday desserts today. Downsizing them seems something we should be doing or need to be doing, because for most of us, our holiday celebrations, if you're like me and you're living alone, solo, as I say, you'll have dessert for one, maybe you'll have two or three. So it's really easy to do. And, you know, this year, these last few months and so on, I'm doing probably more cooking and baking than I have in a long time. I'm enjoying learning new things and revisiting recipes that I haven't used in quite some time. And I'm enjoying that, but I don't really, with food, with savory food, I batch cook. That means that I'm going to be assured to have some nice food to eat, nice, healthy, easy food just to reheat when I don't feel like cooking. And that starts in the morning with my oatmeal, steel cut oats. I make enough for a couple of days. I make a lot of soups and things, but with desserts, I don't want to make really big ones. That said, some of the components that I'm using today came right out of my freezer. There's something really nice about having a cake in your freezer, or ganache, or the vanilla pastry cream, and so on. So before I dive in, I want to start with the bûche de Noël, and I'm going to cue Patrick, our wonderful producer, who has some photos to show you some of the process while I finish shaping it for you. I want to do just a little bit of housekeeping. I want to welcome everyone, as I said, but we have some new students in Essential Vegan Desserts. I'm really happy to be working with you. I've been increasingly inspired. I didn't think that was even possible, by the work that is coming to me for grading. I mean, it's really astonishing, beautiful work. So thank you very much for that. Some people get a little frustrated when a recipe doesn't turn out the first time. We walk through it together, and usually there's a reason, but there's a lot of learning that happens when you get an unexpected result. Occasionally you can use your unexpected result, but you don't want to go there. So just read your recipe all the way through. If there's a problem, note it in the beginning. I know that there are people, I've been getting it seems like more emails and notifications lately saying, well, I got this recipe from the web, the interwebs, and it didn't work. Can you help me? Well, no, I can't help you because it's not a recipe I'm familiar with. And it's a little dangerous, might be a strong word when we're talking about desserts, but it's not a good idea to go and pluck a recipe written by someone that you don't know. Look at comments, if there are comments and so on. But within this particular course, Essential Vegan Desserts, and all of the Rouxbe courses, the recipes have been tested and retested, and they work. So it's very important to learn technique before you go and change out gluten-free or oil-free or fat-free and so on. We're talking about desserts. There are rules that matter, and I really can't emphasize that enough. That's one of the real beauties of having built this course, is that it's technique-driven. So we have on the right side of your screen, you'll see a bar that says ask a question here. You can just put your question in there. Patrick has put a link to the pastry cream that I'll be making or showing you today, and a link and some photos. I think there's a link there's a document, an event document for the marzipan recipe. And so you can have that. Anyone who has enrolled for Essential Vegan Desserts, even if you haven't started the course yet, and you can start at any time now, join our Facebook group. We have a private group and it's really fun. There's a lot of great interaction. That's a place to ask, well, I need a new immersion blender. What do you think is a good brand? Or share photos and so on. Anything of a technical nature, write to support@rouxbe.com. You can always write to me, Fran@rouxbe.com. Anyone here can write to me at Fran@rouxbe.com. And if you have a particular question about a recipe, everyone can probably benefit from your question. Put it in the Q&A, not the one here today, and on the dashboard, and I will answer it. So before I get to the questions, I'm going to shape a Yule log, which is also called a bûche de Noël. Now I'm going to ask Patrick to show the really pretty picture of the bûche, the full-size bûche that's from my cookbook, Vegan Chocolate. Today, I have made a smaller one, and I have a smaller one still that will be for me. Because again, I don't know what I'm going to do with a full-size bûche. And I've also done some different things here from the one in my cookbook. So Patrick, the first photo would be, I want you to know that I've made one layer of the chocolate cake to live for, which is my breakthrough cake, the cake that I made when I left the traditional kitchen to create a modern vegan pastry kitchen years ago. I baked one recipe in this 8x8 square pan. I could have used a quarter sheet pan, but I decided to use this pan. Then I took parchment that fit the bottom of the pan and had lined the pan to cut 3 pieces of cake. This is about 3 inches. This is about 2 3/8 or 2 1/2, and this is a skinny one. My bûche is not rolled. I happen to like cake, and I haven't found a vegan cake that rolls that I'm satisfied with. They take, for me, too much fat at this point. If anyone has one that's successful, I would love to hear about it. So feel free to let me know. I'm just going to grab my gloves here just in case. So the first thing I did was I cut the cake. I used a ruler kind of, and I folded the paper. Then the second photo is going to show you that I glazed each piece of cake with some chocolate ganache. That does 2 things. It adds some flavor and it waterproofs the cake. This is a very moist chocolate cake. Those of you who are familiar with the Engine 2 diet and Rip Esselstyn, this was his wedding cake. As a matter of fact, I did a version of it without oil, and you can also do a gluten-free version. This is the full wheat version with a little bit of fat. But I like it, gives a little bit of flavor, waterproofing, and some textural interest. Then I haven't done this in the past, but I had some buttercream. The recipe is in the course, American buttercream, in my freezer. And it's labeled. Everything is labeled. I had added some ground powdered freeze-dried strawberries, and I let it defrost a little bit, and I whipped it in my KitchenAid stand mixer. And I decided to pipe a border. So we have a photo of that as well. Now, what I want to say about that buttercream is you might be able to see that this is pretty liquefied. I left some out to show you. I didn't use any shortening. I used full butter, and I used Miyoko's butter. And I think Miyoko's artisan butter is absolutely delicious, but it is lower in fat than some of the other vegan butters. so it doesn't hold up. If you use, in the coarse recipe, we have half vegan butter, half shortening. Some people do it with all butter. Just, be aware of, you're not going to put a buttercream, American buttercream vegan cake out in Nashville in the summertime, let's say. And then over the ganache, which had set very quickly because the layers were cold. It's much easier to work with cold layers. I spread some raspberry jam. I didn't have strawberry jam. And I spread some raspberry jam. And then on one layer, I spread some of our, let me get it actually. So this is what I call my vanilla pastry cream. I have a few different iterations of it depending, it's different depending on how much liquid you use. But when you make it according to the recipe, it's really thick. This has been beaten, but you can use it as a tart filling and it will even cut beautifully. So I used some of that. I'm going to put it under here. My stove is on because I'm going to do a molten chocolate cake the easy way. And now let's get this cake shaped. It's up to you what you do. The photo from my book, which you can have a look at now, you can see that the layers are more shaped. Is that a way to say something? Further shaped than they are here. I also baked off a couple of rounds or cupcakes or truffles, whatever you like, to represent the log. Honestly, I had an idea the reason that I chose this pan was I wanted to do a log kind of sitting, not a long one, but sitting upright. And I realized if I was going to make it small, it would look like a candle, not like a log. So I went back to this. I like, and I suggest to my students to use something to stabilize the cake. So I'm going to, it's nice and cold, and it should be cold. I should stop here because I cut this piece off. The beauty of this cake, there are many beauty parts of this cake, is that it looks so magnificent, but it's really easy to make because you can hide imperfections with the glaze. So I'm just taking some extra bits off. Here, I have lots of parchment around. And now, let's see, take a little bit more off the top. If it breaks, it doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, when I went to put the second layer on, it did break. But you can fix those breaks with icing, so don't worry about it. Aim for the best you can do and know that most things can be fixed. And for me, we do eat with our eyes, that's for sure. But food, desserts have to taste good too. So here we go. I have 2 different bowls of ganache here. And I may have to put this back in the refrigerator. And I'm just going to lob this on. And I'll do a second coat. And when it's firm enough, I'm just going to use a fork, not even a cake comb, to make it look like bark. Recently, I saw someone who was making a bouche put the chocolate ganache all over the cake and then put aluminum foil on the ganache and let it set up that way. And when she crumbled the aluminum foil, and when it came off, it definitely looked crumbly, but I don't put aluminum foil on my desserts, so I don't use aluminum baking powder and so on. So, you know, while I do this, I'm going to multitask here, which I don't like to do when I'm making desserts, but I am going to. What I have here are two small, this is the same cake recipe, but I bake them in ramekins. I don't, it's personal, right? It's personal. So if you like it made the way that a molten cake is made, go for it. I don't like the texture of a molten cake. I baked the cake. I took the core out. I put a truffle in here. In this one, I covered it with a little chocolate. I'm going to pop it in the oven. Actually going to put my timer on. And we'll have a molten chocolate cake soon. So here I go. This would happen faster if I was set up a little bit better, but I'm just going to pop this in the fridge. You can see that I'm not being very particular. There's no reason to be very particular. I'm moving it. I don't usually wear a white coat when I'm working with chocolate. And I don't know if you can read the coat. Maybe you can when I come closer to answer your questions. But it actually says, Fran Costigan, the diva of vegan desserts, or dairy-free. I don't know. One of my former students decided, she thought that was funny that I was a diva. And I thought, gee, I don't know. Maybe that's not a good thing, but it made me laugh. So go ahead. Let's be divas, ladies. All right. So this is kind of the rough coat. The recipe in my cookbook has exact amounts for the full cake, but you know, you go ahead and have them. During this time of stay at home, I actually scaled the recipe for the chocolate cake to live for down, and I baked a cake for one. And I'm not good at math, so I had some help, but it worked. So just, you know, scale up and scale down. You really don't have to make any changes for most recipes. Okay, let me spin this around here so I can take a look. Yep, it's sloppy, but it's good. I'm just going to put it very carefully in the fridge. And then when the molten cakes come out, it should be time to do this. Okay. People ask all the time about holiday gifts for foodies. And I will say, I do have a holiday guide up on my blog, and I have some interesting items. But to me, you can't have enough kitchen towels. And I use some for wrapping my vegetables, and I use some for desserts and others for cleaning. So that's it. I'm going to take my gloves off right now. I have more available. I want to show you. This is what I put in the molten cake. These are just some truffles. I don't use, I have it. I don't really use this. The ganache, it's the same ganache for the glaze. It's just a different proportion. But I did something new this week. And you saw the ganache. I mean, you see what this is ganache. I have a whole chapter on truffles in vegan chocolate. And essentially, it's a particular percentage of chocolate and some liquid. You can add spices and so on, but that's what it is. It's not enriched with fat. This week, I decided to make a ganache with the same chocolate that I use. This happens to be Valrhona, 70%. It's one of the chocolates that I like. There are many. I cut back on the oat milk, which is the milk that I prefer to use. I like Oatly a little bit. And when it was melted, I added in, but still a little bit warm, I added a little at a time of Miyoko's cultured vegan butter and some brandy. And I must say, it's really good. It's very rich. This would be a real once in a while thing for me because I find that these are decadent enough, but this is pretty good. Something else that I did was, in the course, there is a recipe for, what's it called? Gluten-free brownie thins. And they're baked. This is an 1/8 sheet pan, an 1/8. But they're baked in a half. I divided the recipe in half. And I baked them and then I baked them again. And I kind of made some logs. So there's lots of ways that you can make a log, right? So, you know, go for it. Now, what I'm going to do now, so I guess I would say you can't have enough kitchen cloths, offset spatulas, whisks, and parchment paper. Now, here's my parchment paper on my turntable. And now I'm just going to finish up my little bouche. This, to me, would be a single serving. And I had done this the other day. I'm holding it up so you can see that it's shaped. I had the ganache on and I had it forked. I'm going to do some more. And instead of an extra piece of cake, I used a truffle. That was in my freezer. Oh, my timer's on. So let's see what's going on here. Needs a little longer. Now, if you're wondering, won't that make the cake dry? I picked a cake, again, the chocolate cake to live for, that is exceedingly moist. So what I'm going to do here is smush another, there's the truffle. I'm going to take some confectioner's sugar. Actually going to, I want to show you some little cookies that I made. These are the vanilla cookies. You can find the recipe. They're from my first cookbook. You can find the recipe on my blog. What we make, there are lots. I get lots of requests this time of the year for sugar cookies. But this cookie actually, you know, maybe like me, you like things from memory. And I loved arrowroot cookies when I was growing up. This cookie is really delicious and super, super versatile. So you can roll them and cut them into shapes, and it's just flour, some arrowroot, and maple syrup. There isn't any granulated sugar, but there are lots of good cutout cookies. I baked half with a little hole. I used a piping tip, and I filled them with some jam. You can also add some chocolate if you like. So now let me get the confectioner sugar over here. If you've been with me before, you've heard me, I have to use the word fetching. I'm from New York. All these months saying that my kitchen renovation was halted by the stay-at-home. But I figured a couple of things out. And the fact is that when I worked in restaurants, the space was really tight anyway. So it's fine. It's just fine. I'm grateful to have a working kitchen. Now I'm going to put my little marzipan mushrooms here. When I was writing vegan chocolate, no one knew about the miracle of aquafaba. I think Miyoko was doing something like that with, no, that came later, with flax gel. But so I said, well, what am I going to replace my meringue mushrooms with? And I made a vegan marzipan. You have the recipe. It's really simple. I'm going to take one apart to show you. You just shape a ball, and then I use a flat end of a chopstick to make an indentation and glue the bottom of the mushroom in with some melted chocolate. And then I like to add a little bit of cocoa powder, a dusting of cocoa powder on them. I hear the buzzer's going to buzz. So they look like mushrooms. And then I'll finish this up, but first the molten cakes. Okay, I'm going to let this cool for just a minute so I can finish the bouche. I candied some cranberries. Just instead of using sugar water, I used maple syrup. Brought it to a boil with a little bit of orange juice for an orange zest. You can certainly add some Grand Marnier if you want, which I probably will later while I watch the snow. I love cranberries. I absolutely love cranberries. So I make Cranberry Coulis and candied cranberries a lot. And then, because this is a log and it's probably in the woods, and I like the smell of rosemary, we can do that. Or if you have a bigger log, you can actually make it like a little tree is growing out of your bouche. So there is my, let me look at it. There's my bouche for one. And you can fill out the plate. I'm going to show you, I know I promised a couple of people, I think Lady Aga is here from Scotland, how to do chocolate transfer sheets. But I'm going to put a couple of little truffles on my plate. I'm definitely having a party later. And there's a bouche for one. And I really hope you will all try that at some point. It's super easy. This is not going to waste at all. This piece is going to be added onto the larger bouche, and then I save all of my crumbs. All of my crumbs. Is anybody having a beverage today? I had a little bit of eggnog recently. There's an eggnog recipe in the plant-based professional course at Rouxbe and in my course as well. Now what I'm going to do, really simple. Oh, you know, I have these little Santa Claus cupcake papers because I pay good money for quality ingredients. Quality ingredients are super important, but I try to save money where I can. And so in past years, I've been buying decorations like this little Santa Clauses and Valentine's Day and Halloween and so on after the holiday. So here's another little holiday treat. Okay. Everything's going up on here today, and then I'm going to swing it around and answer your questions. For anyone who doesn't know what a chocolate transfer sheet is, it's a piece of acetate, and it's been printed, and there are loads of designs, loads of designs. So I made some earlier in the week. Ideally, you do this with tempered chocolate. There is a way to keep a snap and a shine on the chocolate if you keep it in the freezer. So this is some of the transfer that I did earlier. This is just little bubbles. This one is one that I really like. I'm finding it more difficult now. I was late, so I didn't get any holiday ones. You can cut little rounds and top a cupcake, or put one of your chocolate enrobed truffles on the sheet and the design will pick up. But what you have to do is feel which side has the colored cocoa butter. Don't put it on the other side or it's not going to transfer. So I have this melted chocolate here. This is super simple. And this is one of those things that can really elevate your desserts. So just make them and keep them in your freezer. But you want to have enough chocolate so that it's the layer when you take it off is not too thin. If anyone's wondering about the amount of chocolate I have here in my pantry, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I got a delivery today, I understand, right before I was setting up with Patrick. I got some new milk chocolates, vegan milk chocolates to taste. And I'm really excited about that. So that's the whole thing. If this was tempered chocolate, I'd leave it out and it would set up. I'll probably pop this in the fridge and we'll see what happens. All right, I'm going to swing this around. I am so proud of myself. I put this together by myself this week and come closer and answer some of your questions. All right. Adele says, I'm new to the whole food plant-based lifestyle. I typically make a sour cream coffee cake on Christmas morning. I'd love to learn how to replace the butter, oil, eggs, and sour cream in the recipe. That's a really good question, Adele. I'm glad that you asked it because those are a lot of things to replace. We have today so many superb vegan versions of things that you don't really have to take something like that and try to adapt it. For example, we have, a vegan vanilla cake or a coffee cake with some vegan sour cream that you can purchase or make yourself with, for example, the vanilla pastry cream or tofu cream that you ferment a little bit will do it. So instead of trying to replace everything, start with a vegan recipe and you'll be surprised, but you'll definitely find them. Okay, the next question is, what's the secrets to making a fabulous gluten and oil-free dessert? My arthritic condition improves when I omit oils and many families are gluten sensitive. Well, that is not an unusual question. When I'm doing an event, if you were all here and I was going to feed you, how I wish that was going to happen today, actually. I would love the company and I'd love to have a little party. I am not gluten-free. I have no sensitivities to any foods other than the fact that I am lactose intolerant. And I've, vegan just because the cakes that I make and the desserts that I make, nobody really knows unless you say, and that's the way it should be. There's no problem. But if I were making things and I couldn't say who has a sensitivity to this, that, and the other thing, I make a couple of assumptions. So I generally will make a gluten-free cake. I will use oat milk instead of soy milk. I also eat soy. I have no problem with that. But I assume soy. And I assume nut allergic. So the oat milk, which is nice and rich and has a nice flavor, works. When you're taking out the oil, There are lots of, again, I want to go back to the reason for Essential Vegan Desserts is to teach people how to make something that is really fabulous with a formula. We're talking about technique. We have a whole section on replacing fat, but when you start taking fat out, for example, you get some textural changes. Some people don't mind it and other people do. The chocolate cake that I'm talking about, the chocolate cake to live for, which was my breakthrough cake, well, I eat it made with wheat flour, AP, and whole wheat pastry flour, and a whole cake that will serve 12 people has only 4 tablespoons of oil. So that's a very little bit of oil. When I made that cake for Rip Esselstyn, you can be sure that I left the oil out because Dr. Esselstyn they don't want any oil at all. And it worked, but it was different. It was, to me, denser. People really like it. So it depends what you like. People use applesauce to replace oil. My favorite is actually prune puree, I think, or paste, which is now called plum because, I don't know, somewhere along the line, the prune board said, let's call them dried plums. So that's what you can do, but you have to do some experimenting. So the thing to do is to take a recipe that you're trying, cut it in half, and at least in half, maybe by a quarter, and see how it works for you. Dara wants to know how are non-dairy ingredients different to dairy ingredients? We are so lucky today. There are so many wonderful non-dairy milks and creams, and I don't think they behave differently at all. Pretty much for example, if you're replacing dairy milk with a plant milk, most of them are interchangeable. I don't think they all are. I use rice milk, has the lowest protein and the least amount of fat. I use that in a very particular way. I don't love the taste of hemp milk in a pudding, for example, but I like it in a dressing. So find the one that you like, and it just shouldn't be a problem. Today, you can find or you can make vegan sour cream, tofu, ricotta, and heavy cream. And this pastry cream really works a charm. Cashew cream is great. Tofu creams are great. I have added lemon juice to my cream and let it stay out on the counter for overnight. And I see my friend Kathy Gold is here. Kathy is the owner of In the Kitchen Cooking School and has an amazing palate and a great knowledge base. And I asked her to taste it. I have to ask other people to taste things because I get used to my own food. And she said, tastes like creme fraiche. So that felt really good. So I wouldn't worry about that. Now, Marina wants to know, can you use a neutral oil or vegetable shortening instead of butter in baking? Absolutely. I use oil more than I use butter. And that's it's definitely because when I was coming up, 25 years or so ago, the only butter substitute, and I was asked to use it at my first restaurant job, was hydrogenated stick margarine. So hydrogenation isn't healthy, and that margarine had an odor and a taste that was awful. So I started using neutral oils. Now there are many. I think sunflower oil has almost a buttery taste, flavor. I like sunflower oil, grapeseed oil. If you use canola, these are neutral oils. If you use canola, make sure it's organic, because if it's not organic, it will have been genetically modified, and there are lots of chemicals in the oiling, in the process. Canola is rapeseed. I also love olive oil. I know where olives come from. So if I'm making an Italian olive oil cake, I look for an oil that has a nice pungent taste. Otherwise, I use a rather neutral flavored oil. And the one that I like is California Olive Ranch Everyday Oil. It works Great. Susan wants me to talk about milk powder in baking. I don't use milk powder. I never used milk powder when I was baking traditionally, so I can't really talk too much about that. I do now have coconut milk powder and cashew powder that can be used to reconstitute. But Susan, I really, I can't help you with that. I don't think it's necessary. Catherine's looking forward to the desserts class next month. Well, I'm looking forward to working with you, Catherine. I really am. And you might not know, you can start at any time. So if you don't want to wait until January, you can start now. Catherine's question is she wants to adapt the recipes to oil-free and use whole grains. We use a lot of whole grains in the course, and there are many naturally oil-free recipes, but I do ask people, even the whole food plant-based no oil people, that if there is to make an assigned recipe the way it is written the first time, if you can't taste it, don't taste it, but you can learn a lot by looking at the consistency, the snap, everything. You have to know what a dessert is meant to look like and behave like before you can go ahead and adapt. But we do have a lot of oil-free recipes, and we use really wholesome ingredients, so you shouldn't have a problem. Kathy says it was perfection. Thank you, Kathy. Holly says, what can be, this is a question, I'm not surprised. Holly is having trouble getting whole wheat pastry flour. Yes. I spoke with my friends at Bob's Red Mill, and it's going to be quite a while before a whole wheat pastry flour comes back. I happen to have a stash of theirs. I have some from King Arthur, and I have some from a company called Sunrise Mills, which is quite a different whole wheat pastry flour because it's made with a completely different wheat. So it behaves a little bit differently. This is the only workaround I know right now. Some of the students, something that's really cool about Rouxbe is we have students all over the United States, Canada, all over the world. And it's really interesting to hear what people can find and what they can't find, and we share information. But if you don't have whole wheat pastry flour, and when you do have a whole wheat flour, a whole grain flour, you should keep it cold. So you don't want to have to worry about rancidity. What you can use is whole wheat flour. It's hard for me to say because I always say whole wheat flour, it's good for bread, it's not good for pastry. Remove 1/4 cup, or remove 25%, replace it with a starch like arrowroot or cornstarch, and divide the recipe. Most of my recipes for batter-based desserts are 50% AP, 50% whole wheat. So maybe use a little more AP and then do that kind of hack with the whole wheat. And anybody who's been able to get whole wheat pastry flour, you're very lucky. Kate says, just a comment, I highly recommend this vegan dessert class. I learned so much and the recipes are amazing. And Fran, Kate, that's really nice of you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. You're all amazing. I mean, I just love teaching this course. Now, Holly has a recipe for a tofu carrot cake with 3 eggs, 3/4 cup of oil. I've gotten to a place, and I don't trash other, there's a reason for everything. And I was 25, 30 years ago, I was baking with all those things, and I loved it. And I ate everything, and everything was cool until it wasn't cool. That's a lot of oil. I would suggest instead of trying to fix that carrot cake, you find a good recipe for a vegan carrot cake. And if I may say so, I happen to have one in More Great Good Dairy-Free Desserts Naturally, and it has a very small amount of oil. That is tremendous. So you're also asking about date sugar. No date sugar in batter-based desserts. It doesn't dissolve. If you put it on the top of something, it's going to burn. It has its place. I'll put it on top of a crumble after it's baked, but no date sugar. So Deborah wants to know where she can get bulk chocolate for baking. Go to Chocosphere or send a note to me, fran@ruby.com, and I'll send you some links. There are a lot of companies that have a wide variety of chocolates that are quality chocolates at affordable prices, particularly in bulk. And Deborah wants to know also about sunflower lecithin, when to use, why liquid versus powder. Usually the recipe will say if you're using liquid, use this much. If you're using powder, this much. It doesn't really matter. So just follow what the recipe says. Regina has a question. Happy holidays, chef. Well, happy holidays to you. Please talk about the differences for uses in xanthan and guar. Let me take that question first, because you've got a couple of questions here. Technically, there is a difference between xanthan and guar. I went to one of the experts at Bob's Red Mill and we discussed it. King Arthur also has quite a bit of information on it. I find that they work interchangeably. Excuse me, I have both. I keep them in my refrigerator. I tend to use more guar than xanthan, but I use them one for one. Your next question is heat needed to activate arrowroot. Absolutely. So arrowroot is a starch that thickens. It's a gelatinizing agent. I'm sure I said that wrong. And you need to make a slurry when you're cooking with a starch most of the time. That's arrowroot, cornstarch, tapioca starch, flour. You mix the starch with a particular amount of cool water and stir it up before you add it to what you're cooking. Arrowroot is 1 for 1, the measure, to cornstarch, but it cooks differently. So arrowroot thickens just before the boil. As soon as I see a bubble, I take it off the heat. If you keep cooking it, it will thin out. So that's what I have to say about arrowroot. You have extra coconut butter in the fridge. I don't keep my coconut butter in the fridge. It gets hard enough in the pantry, but you just keep it at room temperature or warm. If it's in a glass bottle, for example, you can put it in a pot with a little bit of water and just bring it up to a simmer very carefully, or you can soften it in your microwave. I didn't use microwaves for years, but I'm using it more now. Lisa says, thanks for putting this on. Well, you're very welcome. I love doing this. This is a high point of my month. Okay, Kathy says, I'm excited about this class today. I'm wondering if you have used JOI non-dairy milk powder. I haven't used it. Someone else asked me about it, but I haven't seen it or used it. I'm actually not getting out very much to the stores the way I used to. So I'll look for it, or if you have information about it, feel free to send me the information. But as I said, I do have coconut milk powder and cashew milk powder from Edward & Sons Native Farms, which is a really wonderful brand. Aruna says, I am having some very crystallized sugar while trying to make caramel. Well, yeah, that really happens sometimes. I make my caramel with syrups, not with sugar, but I would just tell you to go very slowly and maybe add in a little bit very carefully, because when you're cooking caramel or syrups, they can boil up and over and they burn. They get very dangerous. So be really careful. Try adding a little bit of very hot liquid. Laura says, thank you for being a vegan pastry chef and hosting this. They're excited about learning. Well, thank you. I mean, this for me is thrilling. When I was working as a traditional pastry chef and my upsets, my dietary upsets and so on, just I actually had to leave work. They had plagued me my whole life, but they got worse. And I left work and I thought that's it, but really it isn't. So it's really wonderful. Thank you. Ganache keeps in the freezer so well. The ganache that I used today came right out of my freezer. And then I let it sit on the counter for a little while, and then over, not in, but over a very small amount of barely simmering water. That's how I reheat it. I don't stir it until the center is still firm. Then I stir. You don't want to over stir. Do a test as I pound this. Do a test before you finish cooking your ganache, making your ganache. So do a test again, Shruti, and make sure that it hasn't gotten too thick or too thin, and then adjust it with more melted chocolate or more liquid as needed. Any tips for making the dough for chocolate ravioli? Well, I've seen people do that. I'd use some very nice, not a lot, a little bit of cocoa powder. I'd use Dutch process, and that's really, sounds like a delicious New Year's, a fruit, cashew, cheese regatta ravioli for New Year's. I'd like some of that, that's for sure. Is there a good butter that you recommend? And is a vegetable such as sunflower? Let's talk about replacing butter, even vegan butter, with oil. Dairy butter has some solids in it, milk solids. When you're using oil, and remember that vegan butter, while it's hard, is still oil. So I use 3/4 of the amount of oil for the butter that I'm replacing. And that works really well. The butters that I like Miyoko's. I like her traditional butter. I like her new unsalted butter. I've heard good things about Flora butter, which is a higher fat butter. And people are talking about country crock sticks as well. I haven't used them. I have some Earth Balance sticks in my fridge. I don't like the flavor very much. I was looking to see what might still be on. Have to be really careful when you're in the kitchen. So that's it. It's 3/4 of the amount of oil. If you're using 1 cup, if your recipe calls for 1 cup of butter, you use 3/4 of a cup of oil. What recipes I'm making today? Well, I made the chocolate cake to live for, which you can find that recipe on my blog. Go to francostigan.com. I hope sign up. You'll see recipes, go to cakes, and that recipe, which is infinitely variable. The ganache, which I know you know how to make because you have been in the course, and that is also on my blog. Regina wants to know of a brand of jam that's vegan. Well, that's an interesting question because any jam should be vegan. It shouldn't have butter in it. For example, for some ethical vegans want to know that the sugar that's used is vegan as well, which means it hasn't been filtered through bone char. Usually the jam will say organic or vegan, have a little symbol. So that should be pretty easy, but you really want to read labels. You want to read labels every single time you buy something. Even if you bought, I don't know, a chocolate bar the week before and you're like, that is so good. I'm going to go and buy that again next week. You better read the label because maybe some milk powder slipped in. You know, the companies are buying each other. The little cookies are AP flour, arrowroot, I think some oil and maple syrup. You can find that recipe on my blog. My favorite towels, you know, I don't know. It's they're these, and Kathy might know, I buy these by the dozen. So when I was in New York, there was I'm touching my coat, a place where I got my jackets in Soho. And I used to buy piles of these. I've gotten these online at Amazon. I've gotten them here in Philadelphia at Fonte's, but they're really fantastic. They're really fantastic. I just, I know which ones I'm using for vegetables, which ones I'm using for desserts, and I don't use them for cleaning. I have others, but I find because mine are all blue, I know these are my food towels. Hi from the UK. I want to, Elizabeth, is that how you say your name? I love your chocolate dessert book because you use real ingredients, olive oil, and hardly any soy. Well, I think, when I was working as a traditional pastry chef, I used quality ingredients, and I didn't want to not use quality ingredients when I switched over. So in my books and in the course, we use quality ingredients. I use some soy. I went through a period of time, probably when I just transferred over. I thought, I'm not going to do any tofu because that's too hippy dippy and expected. Tofu has a place, and I like soy milk in desserts. But again, because so many people don't want to use soy, I don't. I tend to use oat milk instead, almond milk, cashew milk. It's fine. And if it doesn't work for you, that's the thing, has to work for you. We're all different. We all taste things differently, and we all react to foods differently. So the course in January, you can go to Rouxbe.com, search for Essential Vegan Desserts, and you'll see the syllabus. But, it's the same thing as the book, pretty much. Well, it's not at all the same thing as the book. There's loads of recipes, but what I mean is we use quality ingredients, so you won't have a problem with that. So I hope that you'll join us. That would be really fun. Holly wants to know what I used my saved crumbs for. Well, I make cake balls with some. I tend to crumb some, and I heat them. I bake them in a very low oven until they're a little bit crunchy, and I might make a crumb crust with them. I sprinkle them on top of a parfait. We eat with our eyes, and I like smaller desserts. I find 1, 2, 3 bites of something that's delicious is enough, but we can trick our eye into thinking that a single layer slice of cake or, a whole cake is more than it is by building it up with crumbs and so on. So there you go. Catherine wants to know if there's a good substitute for malted milk powder. I don't actually know. I think maybe barley malt would do that. So Kathy, did I answer your question? I think I did about the little vanilla cookies. AP flour, arrowroot, maple syrup, and I used oil, and you can get that recipe. Okay. Please clarify your recipe on page 130, virtuous vanilla cake. Yeah, I don't have it in my head, but the recipe, that's from my book, More Great Good Dairy Free. The recipe will say if it's 1 layer or 2. If you are making a layer cake and you have 2 pans, you just make more cake. You can do that all at once. When I was working as Angelica Kitchen, and I didn't use a stand mixer there, we used bigger bowls and bigger whisks, and I did batter for 8 vanilla cakes or coffee cakes at a time. So it's doable. Okay, Holly's going to toss that carrot cake. It's in More Great Good Dairy Free Desserts, and that is a long title. I did not have the option. I didn't get to pick that title. It's really simple, and it's healthier, and it's a delicious cake. When I was doing wedding cakes, that was second only to, it was chocolate, lemon, orange, and carrot were my most popular cakes. So carrot cake's delicious. And Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much. Happy holidays to you too. You've been doing my recipes for 7 years. Bless your heart. Thank you. And Mary P is from California, and you're going to join the January class. That's wonderful. I'm looking forward to working with you. And Patrick just reminded me that the chocolate in the fridge is ready. So I'm going to swing this around. You know, I used to call people to help me for the smallest thing, and now I put together racks and just all kinds of stuff. So here it is. And you want to go slowly because we don't want to break anything. And voila. So I just love these. And when it's softened up a little bit, I'll start cutting shapes and so on. Someone won a contest a couple of years ago. I found the photo, but I don't have any information, so I can't look it up. She'd taken a class with me, and then she converted a recipe from Epicurious, I think it was. It was a chocolate cake on the bottom, tofu chocolate mousse, ganache. She did it in a ring or a spring form, candied hazelnuts, and then she cut irregular triangles of transfer sheet and put it all around. And that vegan cake won the top prize. But I had done a wedding cake for a lovely couple at North American Vegetarian Society Summerfest years ago. And I was using transfer sheet to cut out hearts. And when I looked down, I was like, you know, the in-between part is really pretty. And I put that on the cake. They had given me wooden animals as their cake toppers. And I put some of this in-between stuff, and people thought it looked like a fence. And would you believe that a couple of people said to me, well, you know, Fran she really cares about animals, so she wouldn't fence them in all the way. And there you go. There's lots of things that you can do. Well, it looks like we got through all of the questions and on time. So again, I want to thank you very much for being here today. I hope you learned a trick or two. If you have any questions, just send them to me at fran@rouxbe.com. If you're interested in any of the Rouxbe courses, my essential vegan desserts, we have a culinary RX that's quick in and quick out if you're interested in learning about healthier eating, and the 6-month plant-based pro. There's also a professional, it's the French culinary school from Chicago, very famous school that's doing traditional desserts. So we've got you covered, and there's a holiday discount now. So if you're interested, let us know. If not, I hope to see you next month in January. I was trying to think, it's going to be the new year, and won't that be great? And maybe we'll do some lightened up desserts, because I really like fruit desserts too. So after the holidays, we'll go for lightened up. But you can send me your suggestions if there's any topic that you're interested in. Please let me know. And thank you so much for being here today with me. I appreciate it. Happy holidays, everyone. Happy, safe holidays. Bye.